when my daughter-in-law demanded $80 just so I could step into my own dining room. I didn't argue. I paid her, took my seat at the head of the table, and let her believe she was the one running the show right up until I reached for the house documents. I was standing at my own front door when my daughter-in-law, Brooke, held out her hand. $80. Evelyn, think of it as a holiday contribution for Thanksgiving dinner, she said with a clinical, business-like smile, inside my own dining room. The family was already gathered, chatting softly. My son, Sean, stood just behind her, staring intently at the floor, completely silent. A few guests overheard us at the door and laughed politely, assuming it was a joke, but Brooke's eyes remained cold and transactional. I didn't feel an impulse to scream or cry. Instead, a deep, clear calm washed over me. Ever since my husband passed away 2 years ago, Sean and Brooke had been living in the upstairs apartment of my house, and over time, the boundaries had completely blurred. Brooke had offered to cook for today's feast, but demanding admission for me to sit at my own table was the absolute breaking point. Without saying a word, I reached into my purse, pulled out a 50 and 3 tens, and dropped the cash into her palm. Brooke smiled triumphantly and stepped aside. I walked in, took my place at the head of the table, and watched the room. The guests' laughter gradually died down as they realized real money had just changed hands. I ate in silence, listening to Brooke lecture the table on her household management system, and made my decision after dinner. While everyone was distracted with coffee, I slipped away to my study. I opened the small safe in the closet and pulled out the thick, blue leather binder. It held the deed, the conditional residency agreement, and the property title. As I stepped back into the hallway with the documents in hand, I caught Brooke already packing up my antique silver teapot. Brooke looked up as I walked into the room, setting the silver teapot down without a hint of embarrassment. I figured we could borrow this for the next family gathering at my parents' place, she said carelessly. I didn't answer. Instead, I placed the blue binder prominently on the entryway console. Sean caught sight of the folder and swallowed hard. He knew exactly what those documents meant. The house belonged to me, fully paid off and free of debt, while the two of them only had a conditional right to live upstairs predicated entirely on mutual respect and cooperation. During dinner, Brooke had gone on and on about how much work it took to maintain the property and how lucky I was to have such active support. The truth was, I paid the landscaper, and she merely snipped flowers for the table. I sat back down with the guests, remaining polite but emotionally detached. When my sister quietly asked if everything was all right, I just nodded and gave her a reassuring smile. There was no reason to cause a scene and ruin the holiday for everyone else. I watched Brooke run the room, pouring wine and acting like a generous hostess who had allowed me at the table out of pity. Sean remained the passive bystander he had always been whenever his wife called the shots. When the guests finally said their goodbyes around 11, they thanked Brooke for hosting. She soaked up the praise proudly, but the moment the front door clicked shut and silence returned to the house, I turned to the two of them, looking Brooke dead in the eye. I lightly tapped the leather binder. "Tomorrow at 10 a.m., I said, my voice quiet and steady. "We are going over the new rules for this house the next morning at exactly 9 o'clock. There was a knock at my kitchen door. Brooke was standing there, holding little Leo by the hand, shoving a tote bag full of toys toward me. "Evelyn, we need to run downtown to run some errands. You can watch Leo for a bit." "Right," And could you clean up the kitchen from yesterday? We did so much for you last night, she said, her tone dripping with entitlement. In the past, I would have agreed instantly just to keep the peace and spend time with my grandson. But today, I saw right through it. I took a step back, subtly blocking the doorway with my body, and shook my head. No, Brooke, I said calmly. I have my own plans today. I won't be babysitting, and I won't be cleaning up your kitchen. You charged me $80 for dinner, which made me a paying customer. Customers don't do the dishes. Brooke's face contorted with shock and irritation. She opened her mouth to snap back, but I didn't give her the chance. And as for Leo, any babysitting needs to be requested at least 3 days in advance. I am no longer your on-call. Free childcare. Sean came down the stairs just in time to catch the end of it. He looked back and forth between his wife and me, utterly helpless. Mom, don't be like that. It's just for an hour, he mumbled weakly. I looked at my son, without bitterness, but with a firmness he had never seen in me before. I'm not being any way. Sean, I am setting boundaries. Your time management is your responsibility. Without waiting for a response, I closed the kitchen door on them. I heard Brooke hissing furiously in the hallway as they walked away. My heart was thumping, but it felt incredibly good. The first step was taken. Later that afternoon, I used the time they were out of the house to put the next practical step into motion. Up until now, we had shared keys to every single room. Sean and Brooke walked in and out of my living space whenever it suited them, taking tools, raiding my pantry, and using my washing machine without a second thought. I called a local locksmith who had serviced our neighborhood for years. Within 2 hours, he replaced the deadbolts on my front door, as well as the locks to the basement and the laundry room. When he finished, I held 3 shiny new keys in my hand. My privacy was finally physically secured. Around 4 o'clock, I heard them return. The doorknob to my apartment jiggled, followed by an annoyed, aggressive rattling. Brooke was trying to force her old key into the lock, but it wouldn't budge. A few seconds later, she pounded heavily on the wood. I cracked the door open just a few inches and looked at her calmly. What is this? Evelyn, why doesn't our key work anymore? She demanded, visibly rattled by the sudden loss of control. I had the locks changed, I explained in a level tone. Since we are now operating on a transactional basis, where services and meals are strictly billed, a clear physical separation is necessary. My apartment is officially private property. Sean stepped up behind her, his face flushing red with embarrassment. Mom, come on, you can't do this. We're family, he protested. Families don't charge their own mother admission to eat in her own home. Sean, I replied simply. Starting tomorrow, the utilities are changing. 2, I'll drop the paperwork in your mailbox. I closed the door and turned the deadbolt. Over the next few days, the house was eerily quiet. The footsteps overhead sounded heavier, and whenever we crossed paths in the driveway, Brooke stared straight ahead, treating me like a ghost. I didn't let the icy atmosphere bother me. Instead, I sat down at my desk and pulled up the bank statements from the last 2 years. Up until this point, I had been footing the bill for the entire property's heating, electricity, water, trash pickup, and high-speed internet. I had viewed it as a way to help the young couple get on their feet. But that generosity was officially revoked. I put together a precise spreadsheet itemizing the fixed utilities and calculated their exact share based on the square footage of the upstairs unit. It wasn't malice. It was just basic math. On Friday evening, I slipped the invoice into their mailbox in the hall. The total they owed me by the first of the month came out to $450 money they usually kept for vacations and shopping sprees. Not 10 minutes later, Sean came stomping down the stairs. He held the paper in his hand, his fingers trembling slightly. "Mom, this is ridiculous. We agreed we could live here rent-free," he yelled, clearly under pressure from Brooke, who was listening from the top of the stairs. "You are still living rent-free, Sean," I said calmly, pouring myself a cup of tea. "But you are responsible for your own living expenses. I am no longer willing to subsidize your lifestyle while being expected to pay for my own food in this house. The transfer needs to be in my account by the 3rd of the month." He swallowed hard, searching for an argument, but found none. My logic was ironclad. "If that doesn't work for you, you're entirely free to find an apartment elsewhere," I added. He turned around without a word. Brooke wasn't the type to back down without a fight. Once she realized her words had no power over me, she resorted to passive-aggressive stunts. On Monday, she parked their bulky stroller right in the middle of the narrow entryway, barely leaving me room to squeeze past. On Tuesday, she stacked their overflowing trash bags directly outside my patio door. I watched it all through the window without letting my temper flare. An angry outburst from me was exactly what she wanted fuel to paint me as the tyrannical mother-in-law to the rest of the family. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Instead, I took action. I wheeled the stroller out into the uncovered backyard just as a drizzle was starting. As for the trash, I put on some gardening gloves and moved the leaking bags right in front of the driver's side door of Brooke's sedan. When she went out to drive to work the next morning, she had to manually haul her own garbage out of the way just to open her car door. Sean watched the whole thing play out from the upstairs kitchen window. Later that day, I ran into him alone by the mailbox. He looked exhausted, with dark circles bruising the skin under his eyes. "Mom, can we please just stop? This Brooke is completely stressed out. And we are fighting constantly," he said quietly, almost pleading. I placed a hand on his shoulder but kept my emotional distance. "Sean, I didn't start this conflict. It started at my front door when I was charged $80. I am simply defending my space and my right to be respected. If Brooke is stressed, it's the consequence of her own actions." He lowered his gaze and walked back upstairs. I could feel their united front cracking. Brooke was losing her grip, and I was already setting up the final move. The most important lesson life has taught me is to never make empty threats, just present, finished results. With the utility issue settled for the upcoming month, I turned my attention to the long-term setup of the house. The upstairs floor had originally been built as a fully independent mother-in-law suite with its own separate sub-meters for electricity and water. Something my husband and I had designed for the future. I contacted a local real estate agent, an old acquaintance named Marcus, and asked him to evaluate the current market rental value of the upstairs unit. The rental market in our suburban town was booming, and prices had skyrocketed over the last few years. Marcus discreetly confirmed that I could easily list the apartment for $1,200 a month. I had him draw up a professional rental listing sheet and prepare a standard, legally binding lease agreement. My intention wasn't to throw my own flesh and blood onto the street, but rather to give them a definitive choice. Either they engaged in a normal, contractually regulated tenancy at a fair rate, or they made room for a tenant who would respect both my property and my boundaries. I signed the landlord portion of the documents and placed them alongside the market analysis inside my blue leather binder. The following weekend was my brother's annual birthday get-together. Brooke had suggested we all go out to a restaurant nearby, no doubt, to avoid the tension inside the house. But I declined and invited the family to my dining room instead. I baked the cake myself, bought the coffee, and made sure everything was immaculate. When the relatives arrived on Sunday, the mood was polite but visibly tense. Everyone could sense the tectonic plates had shifted. The afternoon went smoothly until my niece mentioned how incredibly difficult it was to find an affordable place to rent in the area. Brooke instantly seized the moment to take a passive-aggressive swipe at me. Oh, definitely. Some people just get lucky and sit on a massive house without having any clue how much work and money it takes to run it day to day, she said, cutting a sharp glance in my direction. The rest of the table fell dead silent. Everyone present still vividly remembered the $80 incident from Thanksgiving. I offered a mild smile, stood up, and walked over to the console table where the blue binder was waiting. I picked it up, walked back to the table, and set it down directly in front of Brooke. Since you brought up the costs and value of housing, Brooke, the timing is actually perfect, I said, my voice ringing out with absolute clarity. I opened the binder and slid the professional market analysis and the lease agreement across the table to her. This is the current market valuation for the upstairs apartment. As you can see, it's valued at $1,200 a month. Brooke turned pale, while Sean just stared at the paperwork, his mouth slightly open. What is this supposed to mean? Evelyn, she stammered, completely blindsided. It means your rent-free arrangement ends at the conclusion of this year. I explained matter-of-factly. This is a standard lease for $900, consider it a family discount. You have 2 weeks to sign it and begin paying rent in January, if you choose not to. I'll take that as your notice to vacate. And Marcus will list the apartment for a standard tenant. The entire room held its breath. No one was laughing now. Brooke tried to lock eyes with Sean to get him to back her up, but my son just stared helplessly at the contract. They were completely cornered. In the days following the family gathering, a heavy stillness settled over the house. No more slamming doors. No more strategically placed trash bags. The balance of power had completely shifted, not through legal threats or dramatic screaming matches, but through the cold, hard reality of property rights. Sean tried to talk to me alone in the kitchen on Wednesday evening. He sat at the table, burying his face in his hands. Mom, 900 plus utilities. That's a massive hit for us. We were trying to save up for a down payment on our own place, he said quietly. I took a seat across from him. I know, Sean, but respect and family dynamics aren't a one-way street. When your wife decided to treat me like a stranger to be nickel and dimed at my own front door, she showed me that you don't see me as a mother. You see me as an amenity to exploit. If you want to treat this relationship like a business, then you have to pay business rates. He looked up and saw the absolute certainty in my eyes. He knew there was no room for negotiation. On Friday night, exactly 1 day before the deadline, the signed lease agreement was sitting in my mailbox. There was no dramatic handoff, no grand conversation. They surrendered because they knew finding anything comparable on the market would cost them hundreds more, and moving right after the holidays would be an absolute nightmare. When I saw their signatures, I didn't feel a surge of triumph or petty satisfaction. It was just the deep, quiet relief of a woman who had successfully reclaimed her dignity and her peace in her own home. The boundaries were finally in writing, and that was all that mattered. 6 months have passed since that autumn, and life in the house has settled into a comfortable, predictable rhythm. The rent and utilities hit my bank account automatically on the 1st of every month. The physical boundaries created by the new locks are strictly honored. Neither of them steps foot into my space without an invitation anymore. Brooke's attitude toward me is now distant, but perfectly civil. The fake, transactional smile is gone, replaced by a cautious, quiet respect. We don't host big, performative family dinners together anymore, and there was never a tearful, dramatic reconciliation. And frankly, that's for the best. Forced harmony doesn't do anyone any favors. Instead, I have scheduled quality time with Leo now when he hangs out down here. We have a wonderful time. I am his grandmother, not an on-call babysitter who can be taken for granted. Sean actually looks less stressed these days. He no longer has to play referee since the lines are clearly drawn. With the extra income from the rent, I finally treated myself to something I've wanted for years. I booked a solo trip to Vermont for the fall foliage and bought a beautiful new armchair for my reading nook. When I sit there in the evenings, sipping my tea and enjoying the quiet of my home, I feel a profound, unshakable contentment. I didn't lose my home to family drama. I preserved it through practical, decisive boundaries. I am the master of my own domain, again, free, independent, and respected. Sometimes, an outrageous $80 bill is exactly the wake-up call you need to remember the true value of your own peace.